The evening had started like any other Sunday dinner at the Henderson household. Mom had spent hours in the kitchen preparing her famous pot roast, the aroma filling our modest two-story home in suburban Ohio. Dad had been unusually cheerful, humming while he set the table with Mom's good china, the kind she only brought out for special occasions. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. "Sarah, you'll love Richard," Dad had said earlier, adjusting his tie for the third time. "He's been my supervisor for 12 years now. Really down-to-earth guy, despite running the whole department." I nodded politely while helping Mom arrange the dinner rolls in a wicker basket. "Looking forward to meeting him, Dad." What I hadn't mentioned was that Richard Patterson and I had already met. In fact, we'd worked together on a classified operation in Eastern Europe 2 years ago. He'd been a civilian contractor then, providing financial analysis for a joint military intelligence mission. I'd been Captain Sarah Chen, leading a team of specialists in what the Pentagon euphemistically called, quote, asset recovery. The irony wasn't lost on me. Here was this man who'd seen me coordinate a multinational operation, who'd watched me make split-second decisions that affected international security, and he was about to sit down to dinner, thinking I was just David Henderson's unemployed daughter, who'd been finding herself since college. The doorbell rang at exactly 6 o'clock. Mr. Patterson was the kind of man who prided himself on punctuality, something I'd learned during our brief professional relationship. Dad practically bounced to the door, his excitement palpable. He'd been talking about this dinner for weeks, ever since Mr. Patterson had mentioned wanting to meet his family. "Richard, come in, come in," Dad's voice boomed through the house. "Martha, Sarah, Tyler, come meet my boss." I took a deep breath and walked into the living room, mentally preparing myself for what could be a very complicated evening. Mr. Patterson stood in the doorway, a bottle of wine in one hand and a warm smile on his face. He was exactly as I remembered, tall, distinguished, with silver hair and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, the kind of man who commanded respect without demanding it. "You must be Sarah," he said, extending his hand. "Your father talks about you constantly." I shook his hand, looking directly into his eyes. There was no recognition there, no flash of memory. Good. The operation had been compartmentalized, and clearly he didn't remember every contractor he'd worked with. Or perhaps he simply didn't expect to find a former military officer in his subordinate's suburban living room. "Nice to meet you, Mr. Patterson," I said, my voice steady. "Please, call me Richard. Any friend of the family is a friend of mine." We moved to the dining room, where Mom had outdone herself. The table looked like something from a magazine, crystal glasses catching the light from the chandelier, cloth napkins folded into perfect triangles, and enough food to feed a small army. Tyler, my 19-year-old brother, had actually combed his hair for the occasion, though he still looked uncomfortable in his button-down shirt. "This looks absolutely wonderful, Martha," Richard said, taking his seat across from me. "You really shouldn't have gone to so much trouble." "Oh, it's no trouble at all," Mom replied, beaming. "We so rarely get to meet David's colleagues, he speaks very highly of you." Dad puffed up with pride. "Richard's the best boss I've ever had. Fair, honest, knows how to treat people right." "Your father's too kind," Richard said, unfolding his napkin. "He's one of our most reliable employees. 23 years with the company, never missed a deadline, never caused a problem. I wish I had 10 more like him." I watched this exchange with growing unease. Dad was practically glowing with the praise, and I could see how much this job meant to him. He'd worked at Patterson & Associates since before I was born, steadily climbing from junior accountant to senior analyst. It was more than just a paycheck to him. It was his identity, his source of pride. "So Sarah," Richard turned his attention to me as Mom passed the roast around the table. "Your father tells me you're taking some time to figure out your next steps. That's smart. Too many young people rush into careers without really thinking about what they want." I nearly choked on my water. If only he knew what I'd been doing for the past 8 years. "Yes, I'm exploring my options." "She's being modest," Dad interjected. "Sarah's got a degree in international relations from Georgetown. Graduated summa cum laude. She could do anything she sets her mind to. Georgetown, impressive, Richard nodded approvingly. That's where I got my MBA, actually. Different era, of course. What was your focus? Regional security studies, I replied carefully, with a concentration in Eastern European affairs. Something flickered across Richard's face. So briefly, I almost missed it. A moment of confusion, as if he'd heard something familiar but couldn't quite place it. Then it was gone, replaced by polite interest. Fascinating field, he said. Very relevant these days, with everything happening in that region. Have you considered government work? State Department, perhaps? Tyler snorted. Sarah's too independent for government work. She'd probably end up telling some ambassador what she really thinks about his policies. Tyler, Mom warned, but she was smiling. No, he's probably right, I said, grateful for the deflection. I've always been more of a free spirit. The conversation flowed easily after that. Richard was indeed as down-to-earth as Dad had promised. He asked Tyler about his engineering studies, complimented Mom on her cooking, and shared amusing stories from the office. I found myself relaxing despite the surreal situation. This was just dinner with Dad's boss. Nothing more complicated than that. But as the evening progressed, I began to notice things. The way Richard's eyes would linger on me during certain topics. How he seemed to choose his words carefully when discussing international affairs. The subtle probing questions about my travels, my languages, my gaps in employment. So what have you been doing with your time, he asked during dessert. Traveling? Volunteer work? A bit of both, I said vaguely. I spent some time abroad. Consulting work, mostly. What kind of consulting? Risk assessment, security analysis. Pretty boring stuff, really. Richard's coffee cup paused halfway to his lips. Security analysis can be quite interesting, actually. I've done some work in that field myself. Mostly financial security, but occasionally other types. Our eyes met across the table, and I saw it then. The recognition, not of my face, but of the terminology, the careful way I'd phrased things. He was putting pieces together, but he wasn't sure yet. Really? Dad perked up. I didn't know you did security work, Richard. Oh, just some consulting on the side. Government contracts, mostly. Nothing too exciting. I felt my palms getting sweaty. This was exactly the kind of conversation I'd been avoiding for years. The military had strict policies about operational security, and even though my service was technically over, old habits died hard. Government work can be complex, I said carefully. Indeed it can, Richard agreed. Especially when you're dealing with, shall we say, sensitive situations. Sometimes you meet people in those contexts and then encounter them again in completely different circumstances. It can be quite disorienting. The room seemed to shrink around us. Mom was obliviously refilling coffee cups, Dad was reaching for another dinner roll, and Tyler was texting under the table. But Richard and I were locked in a careful dance of words, each testing the other's boundaries. I imagine it would be, I said. Though I think most people in that line of work are pretty good at compartmentalizing, keeping their professional and personal lives separate. Absolutely, professional discretion is paramount, though sometimes, he paused, studying my face. Sometimes the personal and professional can intersect in unexpected ways. My heart was pounding now, he knew, maybe not everything, but enough to make this dangerous. I thought about the phone in my purse, the secure line I could call, if this situation became compromised. But what would I tell them? That my father's boss had figured out my identity over pot roast and mashed potatoes? Well, I said, forcing a smile, I think most people are pretty good at maintaining appropriate boundaries. Of course, Richard agreed. Though I have to say, Sarah, you remind me of someone I worked with once. Very professional, very capable. She had a way of taking charge in difficult situations that was quite impressive. Dad looked up from his roll. Taking charge? That sounds like our Sarah. She's always been a natural leader. Even as a kid, she'd organize all the neighborhood children into elaborate games and projects. I can imagine, Richard said, his eyes never leaving mine. Some people are just born with that quality, that ability to assess a situation quickly and make decisive choices. It's rare, really. Sarah's always been special, Mom added, returning to the table. Remember when she was 16 and organized that whole charity drive for the homeless shelter? Raised more money than anyone expected. A natural organizer, Richard mused. I bet she'd excel in any field that required strategic thinking. A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. I was gripping my napkin so tightly my knuckles were white. This had to stop before it went too far. I think you're all giving me too much credit. I'm really just trying to figure out what I want to do with my life. Nothing wrong with that, Richard said, finally looking away. Though I suspect you'll find your calling sooner than you think. Some people are meant for significant responsibilities. The conversation moved on to safer topics after that. Tyler's upcoming finals, Mom's garden, Dad's latest project at work. But I could feel Richard's eyes on me throughout the rest of the evening, and I knew our careful détente was temporary at best. As the night wound down, Richard helped clear the table despite Mom's protests. Wonderful meal, Martha. David, you're a lucky man. We're the lucky ones, Dad replied. Having you here, getting to know you better. Sarah, what did you think of Richard? Before I could answer, Richard's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, frowned, and then looked directly at me. I'm sorry, I need to take this. Work emergency. He stepped into the hallway and I could hear the low murmur of his voice. When he returned, his expression was grave. I'm afraid I have to cut the evening short, he said. There's been a situation that requires my immediate attention. Oh, I hope everything's all right, Mom said, concerned. It will be, Richard assured her. These things happen in my line of work. Thank you again for a wonderful evening. He shook hands with Dad and Tyler, hugged Mom, and then turned to me. Sarah, it was truly a pleasure meeting you. I have a feeling we'll be seeing each other again soon. There was something in his tone that made my blood run cold. Not a threat, exactly, but a promise. Or perhaps a warning. After he left, my family spent another hour rehashing the evening. Dad was thrilled with how well it had gone, Mom was already planning to invite Richard back, and Tyler was relieved it was over so he could change out of his dress shirt. I helped clean up, my mind racing. What had that phone call been about? Had Richard made some calls after recognizing me? Was my cover blown, or was I just being paranoid? Sarah, you were awfully quiet during dinner, Dad observed as we loaded the dishwasher. Everything okay? Just tired, I lied. It's been a long week. Richard seemed to really like you, Mom added. He kept talking about how impressive you are. He's a nice man, I said carefully. I can see why you enjoy working for him, Dad. What I didn't say was that Richard Patterson was more than just a nice man. He was smart, observant, and had access to resources that could make my life very complicated. As I went to bed that night, I couldn't shake the feeling that everything was about to change. I was right, but not in the way I expected. At 6:47 a.m., my secure phone buzzed. Only 3 people had this number, and none of them called unless something was seriously wrong. The caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize, but the encryption pattern was familiar. Government. Chen, I answered, my voice instantly shifting to the clipped tone I'd perfected during my years of service. Captain Chen, this is Deputy Director Williams, Defense Intelligence Agency. We need to talk. My stomach dropped. Deputy Director Williams was practically a legend in intelligence circles, the kind of woman who could make foreign ministers sweat with a single glance. If she was calling me directly, something major was happening. Ma'am, I'm no longer on active duty. My clearance expired 6 months ago. Your clearance was reactivated at 0400 hours this morning. There's been a development regarding Operation Nightfall. Operation Nightfall. The mission that had officially never happened, involving assets that technically didn't exist, in a country the United States had no business operating in. The mission where I'd first worked with Richard Patterson. What kind of development? The kind that requires immediate damage control. How well do you know Richard Patterson? The question hit me like a physical blow. We worked together briefly during Nightfall. Why? Because as of last night, he's been flagged as a potential security risk. His financial records show some interesting patterns, and there are indications he may be feeding information to unfriendly parties. I sank into the chair beside my window, watching the rain streak down the glass. That's impossible. Patterson was thoroughly vetted for Nightfall. His background check was cleaner than a surgical instrument. People change, Captain. Money talks, and Patterson's been listening. We need you to assess the situation. Consider this a freelance consultation. I can't. He's my father's boss. Any investigation would compromise my family's safety. Your family's safety is already compromised. Patterson knows who you are now, doesn't he? The silence stretched between us, heavy with implications. How did she know about the dinner? Had they been monitoring Patterson? Or worse, had they been monitoring me? Captain, are you still there? Yes, ma'am. How do you know about last night? We monitor all potential security risks. Patterson's communications have been flagged for weeks. When his phone pinged your location last night, it raised red flags. My hands were shaking now. You've been watching my family? We've been watching Patterson. Your family was incidental. But now they're in the equation, and we need to manage this situation before it escalates. What exactly are you asking me to do? Get close to Patterson, find out what he knows, who he's talking to, and what information he's compromised. You have natural access through your father's employment. And if I refuse? Then we'll handle it through official channels. Your father's employer will be subjected to a full federal investigation. Every employee, every client, every financial transaction will be scrutinized. The company will likely fold within months. The threat was clear. Dad's career, his pension, his pride, all of it would be destroyed. 23 years of loyal service was reduced to nothing because his boss might be a traitor and his daughter used to be a spy. How long do I have to decide? You don't. Patterson requested a meeting with you this morning. He'll be calling within the hour. As if summoned by her words, my regular phone rang. The caller ID showed my father's office number. That's him now, I said. Remember, Captain, you're protecting more than just your cover. You're protecting your family and your country. Don't let sentiment cloud your judgment. The line went dead. I stared at my ringing phone, knowing that answering it would pull me back into a world I'd tried to leave behind. But I also knew I had no choice. Hello? Sarah, it's Richard Patterson. I hope I'm not calling too early. Not at all. Is everything all right? You seemed concerned when you left last night. That's actually why I'm calling. I was wondering if you'd like to have coffee this morning. There are some things I'd like to discuss with you. What kind of things? The kind that are better discussed in person. Say, 10 o'clock at the Riverside Cafe downtown? I knew the place. A small, intimate coffee shop with excellent sight lines and multiple exit routes. Either Patterson was being cautious or he was more dangerous than I'd realized. I'll be there. Excellent. And Sarah, come alone. The line went dead, leaving me with more questions than answers. I had 3 hours to prepare for a meeting that could determine the fate of my family and possibly national security. No pressure at all. I spent the next hour researching everything I could find about Patterson's recent activities. His social media presence was minimal but consistent. Photos of his garden, articles about accounting practices, the occasional political comment that leaned slightly left of center. Nothing that screamed international spy. But then I dug deeper, using skills the military had taught me and resources I technically wasn't supposed to have access to anymore. Patterson's financial records showed regular deposits from consulting work, but the amounts were inconsistent with typical accounting consultation fees. Some payments came from shell companies with addresses that led to empty office buildings. More concerning were his travel patterns. 3 trips to Prague in the past 6 months, each lasting exactly 4 days. 2 visits to Vienna, both over long weekends, and a recent trip to Istanbul that he'd taken during his vacation time. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Surveillance photos attached. Review before meeting. DW. The photos showed Patterson in what appeared to be a Prague cafe, sitting across from a man I didn't recognize. The timestamp indicated this was taken just 3 weeks ago. In another image, Patterson was walking through what looked like a train station, carrying a briefcase that seemed too important for a casual tourist. The final photo made my blood freeze. Patterson was standing in front of a building I recognized, the same building where our nightfall debriefing had taken place. He was talking to someone whose face was partially obscured, but I could see enough to know it wasn't a casual conversation. My secure phone rang again. Did you review the materials? Deputy Director Williams' voice was crisp and professional. Yes, but this could all be coincidental. Maybe he's just doing legitimate consulting work. Captain, I'm going to share something with you that's above your clearance level, but circumstances require it. 3 weeks ago, an asset in Prague was compromised. Someone with detailed knowledge of Nightfall operations fed information to hostile intelligence services. 2 of our operatives are now dead. The weight of her words settled on my shoulders like lead. And you think Patterson is responsible? I think Patterson is our best lead. The timeline matches his travels, and he's one of only 12 people who had access to the specific information that was leaked. What information? Asset locations, operational timelines, and most critically, the identities of American operatives working under diplomatic cover. I felt sick. If Patterson was responsible for those deaths, then he was far more dangerous than I'd realized. But he was also my father's boss, a man who'd shown nothing but kindness to my family. There's something else, Williams continued. Patterson has been asking questions about you. He contacted 3 different military personnel offices yesterday, claiming he was conducting a background check for a potential job offer. What kind of questions? Your service record, your specializations, your current status. He was particularly interested in your psychological evaluations and your reasons for leaving active duty. The implications were staggering. Patterson wasn't just suspicious about my identity. He was actively investigating me. But why? Was he trying to determine if I was a threat to whatever operation he was running? Or was he considering recruiting me? Captain, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest. Have you had any contact with Patterson beyond last night's dinner? No. Why? Because according to our surveillance, he's been monitoring your family for at least 2 weeks. He's driven past your parents' house multiple times, and he was parked outside your brother's college last Tuesday. My blood ran cold. He's been watching my family? We believe so, which makes this meeting even more critical. We need to know what he wants and how much he knows. I looked at the clock, 8:30 a.m. I had 90 minutes to prepare for what might be the most important conversation of my life. What's my operational authority? You have none. Officially, you're a civilian having coffee with your father's boss. Unofficially, you're gathering intelligence that could prevent further loss of life. And if things go wrong? Then you were never working for us, and we've never had this conversation. I understood. I was on my own, with no backup and no official support. Just like the old days. One more thing, Captain. Patterson is smart, and he's been at this longer than we initially realized. Don't underestimate him. And don't trust him, no matter how charming he seems. After the call ended, I sat in silence for several minutes, processing everything I'd learned. The man who'd complimented my mother's cooking and praised my father's work ethic might be responsible for the deaths of American operatives. The same man who'd seemed so genuinely interested in my life was potentially a traitor who'd been stalking my family. But I also couldn't ignore the possibility that this was all an elaborate setup. Intelligence agencies were notorious for their paranoia and their willingness to sacrifice individuals for the greater good. Was I being manipulated into investigating an innocent man? Or was I being used as an unwitting asset in a larger operation? The rain had stopped by the time I left the house, but the gray clouds remained, casting everything in a somber light. I drove downtown using a circuitous route, checking my mirrors for surveillance. If Patterson was as dangerous as Williams suggested, he might not be working alone. The Riverside Cafe was exactly as I remembered, small, cozy, with mismatched furniture, and the kind of lighting that made everyone look like they were sharing secrets. I arrived 20 minutes early, choosing a table near the back that gave me a clear view of both entrances and quick access to the rear exit. Patterson arrived precisely at 10 o'clock, wearing a navy suit that looked expensive but not flashy. He moved with the confidence of someone who owned the space around him, but I noticed his eyes were constantly scanning the room. Professional paranoia or guilty conscience? "Sarah, thank you for meeting me on such short notice," he said, settling into the chair across from me. "I hope I didn't disrupt your morning." "Not at all. Though I have to admit, I'm curious about what was so urgent." He signaled the waitress and ordered black coffee, no sugar, no cream. A man who didn't like complications in his beverages, or, I suspected, in his life. "I'll get straight to the point," he said once the waitress had left. "I know who you are, Sarah. More specifically, I know who you were." There it was. The moment I'd been dreading since I'd recognized him at dinner. I kept my expression neutral, but inside, alarms were blaring. "I'm not sure what you mean." Captain Sarah Chen, formerly of the 75th Ranger Regiment, later attached to Joint Special Operations Command. Specialized in high-value target acquisition and elimination. Decorated veteran of Operation Nightfall. He delivered this information calmly, as if he were discussing the weather, but I could see the intensity in his eyes, the way he was studying my reaction. "I think you have me confused with someone else." "Do I? Because I remember Captain Chen very clearly. She was professional, competent, and absolutely ruthless when the situation required it. She also had a small scar on her left hand from a training accident involving a broken window." Instinctively, I glanced at my left hand, where a thin white line ran from my knuckle to my wrist. Patterson smiled. "I thought so. The question is, what is Captain Chen doing pretending to be an unemployed college graduate in suburban Ohio? Even if what you're saying were true, why would it matter to you?" "Because I think we can help each other. You see, Sarah, I know why you left the military. I know about the incident in Syria that was never officially reported. I know about the choices you made that saved American lives but violated several international treaties." My mouth went dry. The Syria incident was classified at the highest levels. If Patterson knew about it, he had access to information that should have been restricted to a handful of people. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Of course you don't. Just like you don't know about the 3 men you killed in that warehouse in Damascus. Or the documents you retrieved that prevented a major terrorist attack on American soil. Or the fact that your actions were deemed so sensitive that they were scrubbed from all official records." Patterson leaned back in his chair, studying me with the patience of a predator. "You're good, Sarah, very good, but I'm not your enemy here." "Then who is?" "The same people who are probably monitoring this conversation right now. The same people who reactivated your clearance this morning and fed you just enough information to make you paranoid about my intentions." My blood turned to ice. How could he possibly know about William's call? "You seem surprised. Did you really think they wouldn't be watching you? You're a walking security risk, Sarah. A highly trained operative, with detailed knowledge of classified operations, living an unsupervised civilian life. Of course they're monitoring you." "What do you want from me?" "I want to offer you a choice. You can continue being their unofficial asset, taking on deniable operations that will eventually get you killed. Or you can work with me on something that could actually make a difference." "What kind of work?" Patterson reached into his jacket and pulled out a manila envelope. The kind that pays very well and serves a higher purpose than government bureaucracy. I didn't touch the envelope. "You're asking me to commit treason. I'm asking you to think for yourself. The people you served, the government you protected. They threw you away the moment you became inconvenient. They made you disappear from the official record, denied you the recognition you deserved. And now they're using you as an off-the-books asset." He wasn't wrong about any of that. The military had indeed erased my service record, and my discharge had been processed so quietly that it was as if Captain Sarah Chen had never existed. "Why should I trust you?" "Because I'm offering you something they never will, the truth about what really happened during Nightfall and why your government was so eager to bury it." Patterson stood up, leaving the envelope on the table. "Think about it, Sarah, but don't think too long. Others are interested in your particular skill set, and they might not be as patient as I am." He walked away without another word, leaving me alone with more questions than answers, and a choice that could determine the rest of my life. I stared at the manila envelope for exactly 37 seconds before sliding it into my purse. The weight of it felt heavier than it should have, like it contained more than just papers. Whatever Patterson had given me, it was significant enough that he'd risked exposing himself to deliver it. The drive home was a blur of suburban streets and racing thoughts. Every car in my rearview mirror looked suspicious. Every pedestrian seemed to be watching me too closely. Paranoia was an occupational hazard in intelligence work, but right now it felt justified. My phone buzzed with a text from Tyler. "Dad's acting weird. Keeps checking his phone and pacing around the kitchen. Mom's making stress cookies. What did you do?" Nothing good, I thought, but texted back, "Everything's fine. Just some work stuff Dad's dealing with." The lie came easily, but it tasted bitter. I'd been lying to my family for years, and each deception had become a small weight in my chest. Now those weights were threatening to crush me entirely. I pulled into a parking lot 3 blocks from home and finally opened the envelope. Inside were photocopies of documents that shouldn't have existed: classified operation reports, financial records, and what appeared to be surveillance photos of government officials I recognized from the news. The first document was a detailed breakdown of Operation Nightfall, including elements I'd never seen before. According to this version, the mission hadn't been about recovering stolen intelligence at all. We'd been sent to eliminate a double agent who'd been feeding information to 3 different intelligence services. The agent had been an American. My hands trembled as I read further. The American agent had discovered something called Project Blackwater, a joint CIA-NSA operation that involved selling weapons to terrorist organizations, then tracking those weapons to identify terror cells. The problem was that some of those weapons had been used in attacks against American forces. The double agent had tried to expose Blackwater, so he'd been marked for elimination. Operation Nightfall had been his execution disguised as a rescue mission. I felt sick. We'd killed an American who'd been trying to protect American soldiers. And I'd been one of the people who'd pulled the trigger. The second document was even worse. It was a psychological profile of me, written by someone with access to my complete military record. The assessment was brutally honest. Subject shows signs of moral flexibility that could be exploited. Compartmentalization abilities suggest capacity for cognitive dissonance. Recommend for black operations requiring plausible deniability. They'd been evaluating me as a potential asset for illegal operations. Every commendation, every promotion, every assignment had been building toward making me into someone who could kill Americans and sleep at night. The final document was a list of names with dates and locations. It took me several minutes to realize what I was looking at: a kill list. American citizens who'd been eliminated by their own government for various reasons. Whistleblowers, journalists, military personnel who'd asked too many questions. My name was at the bottom of the list, with yesterday's date and a location marker for our family home. I dropped the papers like they were on fire. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely start the car. Patterson hadn't been trying to recruit me. He'd been trying to save my life. And now I understood why he'd been watching my family. He'd been trying to protect them, too. My secure phone rang as I pulled into our driveway. I didn't recognize the number, but I answered anyway. "You opened the envelope." Patterson's voice was calm, almost sympathetic. "Where are you?" "Somewhere safe, for now. The question is, are you?" I looked at our house, where warm lights spilled from the windows and I could see Dad's silhouette in the kitchen. "I don't know." "Sarah, I need you to listen very carefully. Deputy Director Williams isn't who she claims to be. The real Williams died in a car accident 6 months ago. The woman who called you this morning is part of a cleanup crew that's been systematically eliminating anyone with knowledge of Blackwater." "That's impossible." I verified her identity through 3 different channels. "They control those channels. Sarah, you need to understand. This goes all the way to the top. The Secretary of Defense, the CIA director, people whose names you'd recognize from the news. They've been running illegal operations for years, and now they're cleaning house." I felt the world tilting around me. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because you saved my life in Prague. Not the fake Prague mission you remember, but the real one. I was the asset who was supposed to be eliminated. You figured out what was really happening and helped me escape." Fragments of memory began shifting into place. Prague hadn't been a recovery mission. It had been an execution. But something had felt wrong about the intelligence we'd received. The target's location had been too convenient, his supposed crimes too perfectly documented. "You changed the extraction point," I said slowly. "You said the original coordinates were compromised." "Because they were, by our own people. Sarah, you've been living with false memories for 2 years. They used experimental techniques to alter your recollection of that mission." "That's science fiction." "Is it? Then explain why you have nightmares about killing someone who was supposedly already dead when you arrived. Explain why you left the military 6 months after a mission you can't quite remember clearly." He was right. I'd been having nightmares about Prague for months before my discharge. Dreams where I was standing over a body that kept changing faces, where I was pulling a trigger that felt wrong in my hand. "The Syria incident," I whispered. "That wasn't real either, was it?" "No, that was implanted to give you a reason for leaving the military that didn't involve questions about Prague. They needed you out of active duty but available for off-the-books work." My phone buzzed with another call, the fake Williams number. I ignored it. "Sarah, you need to get your family out of that house, now. The cleanup crew is already in town." "How do you know?" "Because I've been monitoring their communications. They're planning to make it look like a gas leak explosion. Quick, clean, eliminates the whole family at once." I was already moving toward the house, my mind shifting into tactical mode. "Where can we go?" "There's a safe house in Kentucky. I'll text you the address." "But Sarah, you need to understand. Once you run, there's no going back. You'll never be able to live a normal life again." "I stopped living a normal life the day I enlisted," I said, pushing through the front door. The scene inside was exactly what Tyler had described. Dad was pacing in the kitchen, checking his phone every few seconds. Mom was stress baking, flour covering every surface. Tyler was sprawled on the couch, pretending to study but obviously listening to every word. "Sarah, there you are," Dad said, relief evident in his voice. "I've been trying to reach Richard all morning. Something's wrong at the office. They've frozen all our accounts and brought in federal auditors." My blood ran cold. They were already moving against Patterson's cover identity. "Dad, we need to leave, right now." "What? Why?" "Because your boss isn't who you think he is, and neither am I, and if we don't leave in the next 10 minutes, we're all going to die." The brutal honesty of the statement cut through the domestic tranquility like a blade. Mom dropped her mixing bowl, sending cookie dough splattering across the floor. Tyler's textbook slid off his lap as he sat up straight. "Sarah, what are you talking about?" Mom's voice was barely a whisper. "I used to work for the government, not consulting military intelligence. I was involved in operations that some very powerful people want to keep secret. Those people are coming here tonight to eliminate everyone who knows about me." Dad's face went white. "That's impossible. You're my daughter. You've been looking for—" "Dad, I've been lying to you for years. I'm sorry, but right now we need to focus on staying alive. Pack light. 1 bag each, essentials only. We leave in 5 minutes." "This is insane," Tyler said, but he was already moving toward the stairs. "Sarah, are you having some kind of breakdown?" "I wish I were. Mom, do you have any cash in the house?" "Maybe $300 in the emergency fund." Her voice was hollow, mechanical. "Get it. Dad, your phone. Turn it off and leave it here. Same with yours, Tyler. They can track us through those." As my family scrambled to pack, I did a quick security sweep of the house. Everything looked normal, but I knew that meant nothing. Professional killers were good at staying invisible until the moment they struck. My secure phone buzzed with a text from Patterson, "Company inbound. ETA 15 minutes. Emergency exit through Miller's Woods behind your house." I'd played in those woods as a child, building forts and catching fireflies. Now they might be the only thing standing between my family and a government execution squad. "We're leaving through the back," I announced. "No car. We're going on foot through the woods." "Sarah, this is crazy," Dad protested. "If there's really some kind of threat, we should call the police." "Dad, the police can't protect us from the people who are coming. Trust me, please. I know this sounds impossible, but everything I'm telling you is true." Something in my tone must have convinced him. He nodded slowly and shouldered his hastily packed duffel bag. "What about our lives, our house, my job?" "Gone," I said simply. "All of it. I'm sorry." We slipped out the back door into the crisp October night. The woods were dark, but I knew every path, every fallen log, every creek crossing. We moved in single file, with me leading and Tyler bringing up the rear. Dad was breathing hard within minutes, and Mom kept stumbling over roots and rocks. "How far?" she whispered. 2 miles to the road. There's a gas station where we can call for pickup." "Pickup by who?" "Someone who might be able to help us." We'd been walking for maybe 20 minutes when I heard the explosion. The sound rolled through the trees like thunder, followed by a flash of orange light that lit up the night sky behind us. Our house was gone, along with every trace of our former lives. Mom started crying, quiet, devastated sobs that cut through me like knives. Dad put his arm around her, but I could see the shock in his eyes. Tyler kept looking back toward the flames, his face pale in the moonlight. "You knew," he said quietly. "You knew this would happen." "I suspected. I didn't know for sure until tonight." "Who are these people? Why do they want to kill us?" "Because I know something they don't want revealed. And because you're leverage that could be used against me." We reached the gas station at 11:47 p.m. The attendant looked at us suspiciously, a family of 4 emerging from the woods, covered in dirt and carrying duffel bags. But he let me use the phone after I paid for $50 worth of gas cards. Patterson answered on the first ring. "Are you safe?" "For now. Our house is gone." I saw the news report. "Gas leak explosion, no survivors found. As far as the world knows, the Henderson family died tonight." "What now?" "Now you disappear. All of you. New identities, new lives, new everything. It's not going to be easy, especially for your parents." I looked at my family. Dad supporting Mom as she wept, Tyler staring into space with the shell-shocked expression of someone whose world had just imploded. They'd lost everything because of choices I'd made years ago. "There's one other option," Patterson said carefully. "We could fight back, expose what they've been doing. But it would be dangerous, and there's no guarantee we'd survive." "What would that involve?" "Going public with the Blackwater documents, finding other survivors who can corroborate the story. Building a case that's so airtight they can't just make us disappear." I thought about the kill list, about the names of people who'd tried to expose the truth and paid for it with their lives. But I also thought about the families who'd lost loved ones to weapons that were supposed to protect American interests. If we run, how long before they find us? Maybe a year, maybe 5, but they'll never stop looking. And if we fight, then we end this, one way or another. I looked at my family again. Dad was a gentle man who'd spent his life balancing books and following rules. Mom was a kindergarten teacher who still believed in the fundamental goodness of people. Tyler was 19 years old and had never even been in a serious fight. But they were also stronger than I'd given them credit for. They'd survived the last hour without falling apart. They'd trusted me enough to run into the woods when every instinct must have told them I was having a breakdown. "Dad," I called softly. He looked up, and I saw steel in his eyes that I'd never noticed before. "If I told you that we could make the people who destroyed our home pay for what they've done, would you want to try?" He was quiet for a long moment, studying my face. "Would it be legal?" "Nothing about this situation is legal, but it would be right." "Then yes, I'd want to try." Mom wiped her eyes and stood up straighter. "What would we have to do?" "Disappear completely, become different people, and help me gather evidence to expose one of the biggest government conspiracies in American history." Tyler laughed, but there was no humor in it. 6 hours ago, I was worried about a calculus exam. Now you're asking me to become a spy. I'm asking you to help me save other families from what happened to us tonight." He looked at the orange glow still visible through the trees. "The funeral pyre of our former life. Okay, but I get to pick my new name." Patterson's voice crackled through the phone. "Sarah, there's a car coming. You need to move. Now." Headlights were indeed approaching along the rural road. I couldn't tell if it was friend or foe, but I wasn't taking chances. "Which way?" I asked. "North. Half a mile to an abandoned barn. Wait there." We ran again, leaving behind the last connection to our old life. But this time, we weren't just running from something. We were running toward a chance to fight back. And for the first time since this nightmare began, I felt like we might actually have a chance to win. 6 months later, I stood in a Washington, D.C. hotel room, watching the morning news as my former life exploded across every major network. The headline read, "Massive Government Conspiracy Exposed CIA Weapons Trafficking Scandal Rocks Administration." "Sarah, you need to see this," Tyler called from his laptop at the desk. He'd traded his engineering textbooks for advanced computer programming manuals, becoming our family's digital forensics expert with frightening efficiency. The Justice Department just announced 17 indictments, including the Deputy Secretary of Defense. I walked over to peer at his screen. The past 6 months had transformed all of us. Tyler had grown lean and focused, his boyish features sharpened by the weight of what we'd uncovered. Dad's hair had gone completely gray, but his posture was straighter than I'd seen in years. He'd found purpose in organizing our evidence into unassailable legal documentation. Mom had perhaps changed the most, evolving from a gentle kindergarten teacher into a fierce researcher who could track financial records through the most complex shell company structures. "What about Williams?" I asked, the fake one. "Arrested at Reagan National trying to board a flight to Moscow. The FBI found 3 different passports and enough cash to fund a small war." The door to our adjoining room opened, and Patterson walked in carrying a tray of coffee and pastries. He looked tired but satisfied. The past months had been harder on him than any of us. He'd sacrificed a comfortable retirement to help expose the conspiracy that had nearly destroyed us all. "The Senate Intelligence Committee wants to meet with us next week," he announced. "Full testimony under oath, with immunity agreements already in place." Mom looked up from the financial documents she'd been cross-referencing. "Will it be enough? To stop them permanently?" "With what we've gathered, they'll be lucky if they avoid life sentences. Sarah's testimony alone is devastating, but combined with the documentary evidence, the financial records, and the other witnesses we've found," he shrugged, "it's airtight." The other witnesses had been the key breakthrough. Patterson's contacts in the intelligence community had helped us locate 12 former operatives who'd been used in similar operations. Each had their own piece of the puzzle, their own suppressed memories and falsified records. Together, we'd built a case that spanned 3 decades of illegal activities. Dad set down his pen and rubbed his eyes. "I still can't believe it. All those years working for Richard, thinking he was just an accountant. And he was, actually. A patriot," I finished. "Someone willing to risk everything to expose the truth." The irony wasn't lost on any of us. Patterson had saved our lives by appearing to betray his country, while the real traitors had been the ones wrapping themselves in flags and security clearances. Tyler's computer chimed with an encrypted message. He read it quickly, then looked up with a grin. "Marcus and Jennifer made it to the safe house in Canada. The extraction went perfectly." Marcus and Jennifer were 2 of the other operatives we'd located, a married couple who'd been marked for elimination after questioning their orders during a mission in South America. Getting them to safety had required resources and planning that would have impressed my old special operations unit. "That's the last of them," Patterson said. "Everyone who was on the target list is now either dead, in protective custody, or safely out of the country." "What about us?" Mom asked. "When can we stop looking over our shoulders?" "Soon," I said, though I wasn't entirely certain. The conspiracy had tentacles reaching into agencies I'd never heard of, and cutting off all the heads would take time. But for the first time in months, I felt genuinely optimistic about our chances. My secure phone buzzed with a call from Senator Catherine Morrison, the chair of the Intelligence Committee. She'd been our primary contact in Congress, one of the few elected officials we'd determined was clean. "Sarah, I wanted to give you a heads up. The president is planning to address the nation tonight about the revelations. He's going to announce a complete restructuring of intelligence oversight and prosecution of everyone involved. Will that actually happen, or is this political theater? With the evidence you've provided, it's not optional anymore. Half the intelligence community is going to be facing congressional hearings, and the other half is racing to cooperate with investigators. This isn't something they can sweep under the rug." After ending the call, I found myself thinking about that Sunday dinner that had started everything. 6 months ago, we'd been a normal suburban family worried about mundane things like Tyler's grades and Dad's retirement planning. Now we were living under assumed names, staying in safe houses, and testifying before congressional committees. "Do you ever regret it?" I asked Dad. "Everything we've lost?" He considered the question seriously. "Our house, our old life, my job. Yes, I miss those things. But the alternative was letting innocent people die while pretending we didn't know about it. I can live with losing material possessions. I couldn't live with staying silent." Tyler looked up from his laptop. "Besides, our new identities are actually pretty cool. I always wanted to be a Johnson instead of a Henderson." We'd been living as the Johnson family for 4 months now. Dad was David, Mom was Mary, Tyler was Thomas and I was Susan. Simple, forgettable names that wouldn't attract attention. The transformation had been more complete than I'd expected. New social security numbers, employment histories, even educational records that were seamlessly integrated into government databases. Speaking of identities, Patterson said, I have some news about our long-term situation. The Justice Department has agreed to place us in the Witness Protection Program permanently, if we want it. New lives, new locations, no connection to any of this. The offer was tempting, a chance to disappear completely, to start over without the constant fear of discovery. But I found myself hesitating. What's the alternative? Stay involved, help reform the intelligence community from the inside. The Senate committee wants to create a new oversight position, someone with operational experience who can spot the kind of abuses we uncovered. I walked to the window, looking out at the city where so many of the decisions that had shaped our ordeal had been made. Washington was a place where truth and fiction blended together until they became indistinguishable, where patriotism and treason often wore identical masks. What do you think? I asked my family. Mom spoke first. I think we've started something important. Hiding now feels like abandoning everyone else who might face what we faced. Tyler nodded. Plus, I've gotten really good at this computer forensics stuff. Seems like a waste to just walk away. Dad was quiet for a long moment. 23 years I worked for that accounting firm, thinking I was just processing numbers. Now I know those numbers represented real operations, real people's lives. If we can help make sure that kind of deception doesn't happen again, then we stay, I decided. We keep fighting. Patterson smiled. I was hoping you'd say that. The intelligence community needs people like you. People who remember that the job is supposed to be protecting Americans, not controlling them. My phone rang again, this time with a call from one of the journalists who'd been working on the story. Margaret Chen from the Washington Herald had been instrumental in verifying our evidence and presenting it to the public in a way that couldn't be dismissed or discredited. Sarah, I wanted to thank you again for trusting us with this story. The response has been overwhelming. We've gotten calls from dozens of former intelligence personnel who want to share their own experiences. Any threats? I asked. Experience had taught me that powerful people didn't give up easily. A few, but nothing serious. The story's too public now, and there are too many people watching. Besides, the FBI has been very attentive to our security concerns. After hanging up, I realized how much had changed since that terrifying night when we'd fled through the woods. Then we'd been isolated, vulnerable, dependent on Patterson's protection, and uncertain about who to trust. Now we were part of a larger movement, connected to journalists, politicians, and fellow whistleblowers who shared our commitment to accountability. There's something else, Patterson said, pulling out an official-looking document. The president wants to meet with us. Not a photo opportunity, a real working meeting about intelligence reform. Tyler laughed. From fugitives to White House guests in 6 months. That's gotta be some kind of record. It's not about us, I reminded him. It's about making sure this doesn't happen to other families. The evening news confirmed what we'd been hoping for. The conspiracy was unraveling faster than its architects could contain it. 3 more resignations from high-ranking officials, a special prosecutor appointed to oversee prosecutions, and congressional hearings scheduled to begin within weeks. As I watched the reports, I thought about all the people who'd died trying to expose these same crimes. The operatives who'd been eliminated for asking questions, the journalists who'd suffered mysterious accidents, the whistleblowers who'd simply disappeared. We'd been lucky. Lucky to find Patterson, lucky to stay ahead of the cleanup crews, lucky to reach the right people before it was too late. But luck alone wasn't enough to create the kind of systematic change that was needed. That would require sustained effort, constant vigilance, and people willing to put principle before personal safety. You know what's funny? Dad said during our late dinner. 6 months ago, the most exciting thing in my life was getting a new calculator for the office. Now I'm preparing to testify before Congress about international arms trafficking. Do you miss the quiet life? Mom asked. Sometimes. But I also feel more alive than I have in years, like what we're doing actually matters. I understood what he meant. The military had given me purpose, but it had also required blind obedience to orders that I'd later learned were morally questionable. This work, exposing corruption, protecting innocent people, holding powerful individuals accountable, felt like the mission I'd always thought I was serving. Tyler closed his laptop and stretched. So what's next? After the hearings? After the prosecutions? After all the dust settles? We keep working, I said. There are other conspiracies, other abuses of power that need to be exposed. This is just the beginning. Patterson nodded. The intelligence community has been operating without real oversight for decades. Changing that culture will take years, maybe generations. Then we better get started, Mom said with the determination that had carried her through the past 6 months. As I prepared for bed that night, I reflected on the journey that had brought us here. It had started with a simple family dinner, a moment of recognition between two people who'd shared a dangerous secret. Everything that followed, the revelations, the flight, the investigation, had grown from that single moment when Patterson called me Commander. I thought about the family we'd been then, comfortable, content, living in willful ignorance of the larger world's complexities. That family was gone, along with the house where we'd shared so many meals. But what we'd built in its place, a partnership dedicated to truth and justice, felt more valuable than anything we'd lost. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new revelations, new battles against entrenched power. But tonight, for the first time in months, I felt truly at peace. We'd survived, we'd fought back, and we'd won. The Henderson family was officially dead, killed in a gas leak explosion that had briefly made the local news. But the Johnsons were very much alive, and we had work to do. Outside our hotel window, Washington slept fitfully, a city where secrets and lies were currency, but where truth occasionally broke through like sunlight after a storm. And in room 847 of the Marriott, 4 people who'd lost everything and gained something immeasurable planned their next move in a war that would define the future of American democracy. The fight was far from over, but for the first time we weren't fighting alone. The fight was far from over, but for the first time we weren't fighting alone. 3 weeks later, I stood in the witness chamber of the Senate Intelligence Committee, my hand raised as I swore to tell the truth about Operation Nightfall and everything that followed. The room was packed with reporters, congressional staff, and family members of other victims who'd finally gotten their chance for answers. Senator Morrison's voice carried clearly through the chamber. Ms. Johnson, in your own words, please tell us how a routine family dinner led to the exposure of the largest intelligence conspiracy in modern American history. I looked at my family in the gallery, Dad wearing his best suit and the quiet dignity he'd carried through every challenge, Mom with her hands folded but her eyes fierce with determination, Tyler taking notes with the intensity of someone who'd learned that the world was far more complex than any textbook could capture. Patterson sat beside them, no longer the mild-mannered accountant or the mysterious contractor, but simply a man who'd chosen conscience over comfort. Senator, it began with a pot roast, I said, and despite the gravity of the moment, I saw several people smile. My mother made her famous Sunday dinner, and my father invited his boss. What we discovered that night was that sometimes the most dangerous secrets are hidden in the most ordinary places. As I testified for the next 4 hours, detailing operations that had never officially existed and decisions that had cost innocent lives, I realized we'd accomplished something beyond justice. We'd proven that ordinary families could stand against extraordinary corruption and win. The Hendersons had died in that gas explosion, but the Johnsons had been forged in the fire that followed. When the hearing ended, Senator Morrison approached our group. Your testimony today will reshape how we conduct intelligence operations for generations, but I have to ask, was it worth everything you sacrificed? I looked at my family, at Patterson, at the reporters still scribbling notes that would carry our story to millions of Americans who deserve to know the truth. Senator, we didn't sacrifice anything. We traded a comfortable lie for an uncomfortable truth. And that's the best deal we ever made. Outside the Capitol building, the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the marble steps where so many historic moments had unfolded. Tyler was already planning his return to college. Not for engineering now, but for journalism and digital forensics. Mom had been offered a position with a nonprofit that helped families of intelligence whistleblowers navigate their new realities. Dad was considering work with the Government Accountability Office, his decades of financial expertise finally serving a purpose he could be proud of. As for me, Senator Morrison's offer still stood, a position overseeing intelligence operations, ensuring that what happened to us would never happen to another family. It wasn't the quiet civilian life I'd once imagined, but it was a chance to build something better from the ruins of what we'd destroyed. "So," Patterson said as we walked toward the hotel where we'd spent so many months planning this moment, "what now? The work's not finished." "No," I agreed, "but the foundation is solid, and we've proven something important, that the truth has a way of surviving, even when powerful people try to bury it." The evening news would carry our story again tonight, but this time it wasn't about scandal or conspiracy. It was about accountability, reform, and the quiet courage of ordinary people who refused to stay silent when silence meant complicity. We'd lost a house, but we'd helped build something far more valuable, a system where truth mattered more than convenience, where justice was more important than secrecy. The Henderson family was gone, but their legacy would live on in every family that would never have to face what we'd faced. And tomorrow, we'll get back to work. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.